Alright, since we're still kind of getting a slow start as we push our way through January, I figured since nothing pretty much came out with Glass that we'd go ahead and do this whole looking back on, because I haven't talked about Unbreakable, and then I figured I could just revisit Split since it's been 2 years since I did the review when it first came out, just to see if my opinion happens to be the same or not, and that'll pretty much establish where I stand when we go into talking about Glass. So I figure we'll go ahead and just jump right into Unbreakable, which obviously um, I think the main reason this didn't quite get the most welcome reaction when it came out, at least as far as I remember, I would have been 9 or 10 when this came out. And I remember that some people in my family had gone to see it who were huge fans of The Sixth Sense, and they came away more than underwhelmed, I guess you could say. And I don't remember much about the marketing except that it was pretty much the train crashes and everybody but Bruce Willis dies, and then it kind of goes from there. I think I remember the marketing being a bit vague as it went on from there, so it probably surprised a lot of people if I had to guess. I'm totally just taking a shot in the dark here. The whole comic book angle and how quickly that comes into it, and that's where we're headed and what exactly the focus is and what all of the symbolism comes from, which goes way beyond symbolism as the movie goes further on. And we get a lot of exposition from Jackson's character, but in the meantime, there is still this very interesting story going on, even if it doesn't quite set up maybe the Sixth Sense-esque thriller people might have been expecting at the time. Um, so I don't know if people were expecting horror or what exactly it was, but it was clear it was going to be. He obviously, Shyamalan found that he has a very clear vision, a very unique vision in the way that he brought the Sixth Sense. Obviously, he had done stuff before like Wide Awake and stuff like that, which you would never even think to imagine it's the same person. But this, you could tell that he'd really found a specific style with the Sixth Sense, and he kind of went in another direction, but kind of still had his own feel, sort of like particularly how important the color red is in the Sixth Sense, where you can tell like when you think of Unbreakable, one of the first things you probably think of is like the color blue or colors within that spectrum. So when it starts off, there is this whole before we even go into the whole comic book thing, which comes into Jackson's introduction, we do start off with Willis's character, where it's one of those cases where we're not it's done so well, believe it or not, when you look at where Shyamalan's writing would go. Even in this series, even in the good stuff like Split, he still went there, and that was exposition everywhere, like exposition around every single corner. But this particular scene, when it's just Willis hitting on this woman, it's pretty clear about everything that's going on, but there's still, especially by comparison to his later work, a certain subtlety to it, and the way that the exposition's there, but kind of smoothly. Like when he's hitting on the girl and he manages to work in that he's afraid of water, which any moviegoer probably can figure out when he brings that up. It's like, oh, that'll probably be important later, but he just kind of sticks it in there so smoothly, talking about the sports and then going into synchronized swimming, and then just him making a casual joke of choosing synchronized swimming because it's like, hey, I'm afraid of water, isn't that hilarious? And just making this charming joke towards her, and then obviously the whole he's married, but obviously there's something off about it because he's gonna hide his ring while he hits on this girl and all that. But that pretty much tells us what we really need to know. I mean, obviously there's a lot more to him, but in this moment we feel like we know quite a bit about where he's coming from in this moment before the train even crashes, and then once he gets to that point, then we can take off with that. But in the meantime, also, we immediately meet, well, I guess technically in the first scene, with meeting Jackson's character as a baby, as he is born, which is probably this really, once again, if you don't know what it is going in, or you didn't know in the year 2000, it had to have been this really interesting mystery to start off with this baby who broke his arms and legs during birth, and how that's going to fit into this train crash with Bruce Willis. But then the next time we see Jackson, once he's an adult, we immediately go into the comic book thing and realize that's the territory that this character is in. And I think it's also interesting that this is like, what was it, 2 years before Sam Raimi's Spider-Man maybe? So it was basically 2 years before the superhero origin story really became this mainstream thing and this thing that everybody could recognize. And I think it was Tarantino is often quoted by saying that Unbreakable is a movie about Superman, a Superman that doesn't know he's Superman. Despite the fact that that's pretty much said in dialogue by Jackson when he's trying to explain it to Willis. But even so, there's still something about this where, much like The Sixth Sense, it establishes what kind of story we're working with, like the main character anyway. The question is where it's going to go from here and how it's going to build on this. And this movie is amazing about doing that. But not before it starts off with kind of a more, going into the more human nature of what happens also, because we've got the scene, before it goes into thriller and, like, you know, comic book stuff, we've got the stuff where he comes out of the hospital after it's been confirmed that he's the only one that survived, and he has to walk into this waiting room of all the families of all the other dead passengers, and just this, it's like this walk of shame, and then right into the media, and it's just this terrible sort of human thing of how this is what he would go through should this be a real life situation, which is, turns out, the point of the whole movie. Even all the different directions it goes, it's like, this is pretty much what would probably happen if this was a real life situation. And then that also goes into what his married life is like, which really goes into this nice territory with Robin Wright as his wife, because obviously when you look at this type of movie and you think about the Robin Wright character and how she's the wife in the marriage that's falling apart in a Bruce Willis movie, no less, and you kind of imagine what that role is going to be. It's going to be very simple. She's going to have to basically play one note despite her talent, and just go from there, and basically just bounce off of whatever Willis is doing and play off that. But she really does kind of get to not only do her own thing and have her own particular moments, but the way that she's able to show, like, that inner pain, and the way there's, like, a yearning for the love that they once had, like the love that Elijah himself points out that David was basically willing to give up his potential football career for, and how she's just really hoping to get back to that place, especially since his near-death experience is like, this seems like the perfect time that we should just restart something and really try to reinvigorate this instead of falling further into the despair that this marriage is in and all that. There's even that really nice scene when she comes to the door and she, like, basically says, like, why don't we go on a first date again? Why don't you ask me out and stuff like that? And it's like this really human scene for a character like that normally would be just kind of thrown off to the side in a story like this. And like I said, it really brings out that humanity that's extremely necessary when this story is trying to shape this whole thing of this situation being in a sort of real world. And then talking about the way it builds, because you do have this really great starting point, like this little match that just lights the big fire that this movie eventually becomes, which is, it's a very, you know, not like an out-of-control fire, but it's definitely got kind of an energy to it, even if more downplayed than in something like The Sixth Sense, for instance. So, starting off with just this note that Jackson leaves him, asking how many sick days he's had. And like Willis, we're not incredibly sure, but once again, I have to go way back and pretend I'm in my mindset I was when I first saw this, what exactly that means. And I also kind of like the little moment when he asks his boss that indirectly through another person, and when it gets back to him, he assumes that this is David's passive-aggressive way of asking for a raise. And I like the fact that he didn't even try to, like, tell the story to the guy. He just, as far as we know, he just took the raise and just went on his way. And then when it goes into these little individual scenes, and we really, really build up as David's discovering what exactly is going on here with himself, and kind of, I mean, obviously Elijah's really bringing him along and saying, you know, I really think it's this, you had the potential to be this, even if there's holes in this story, I still feel like you could be this. And the way David just slowly does these little experiments to toy with that. I do remember vividly the first time I saw this, it was the wait scene, when I kind of remember saying to myself that I knew I was watching something really good by the time that scene came around. Like, the whole thing was working for me, but then that scene just kind of is like, the whole movie's kind of broken up into before that scene and after that scene in regards to where the characters stand and the flow of the story and all that, so I've always really loved that scene. I think it's easily my favorite scene in the movie. But on top of all this, you've also got another part of the relationships I forgot to mention when I was talking about the Robin Wright character and stuff like that, is his son, Spencer Tracy Clark, who in the same year was the kid in Gladiator. And this is also a really driving force. I also like the way this worked its way into Glass, the way that it did. was how incredibly important his relationship with his son is. Because, once again, just like I said about Robin Wright, the kid character is also a character that definitely could have just been off to the side. It's like, hey, I have a kid, that means I have drama. And a lot of movies probably would have just left it at that. But the fact that they're both like such a driving force when they're together about how this develops, even to the point of him being there when he goes to see Elijah, which was an interesting choice to make. But it's almost like he kind of inherently knew that this was going to be important for his son to know, and that they would kind of be their thing as opposed to just him going at this alone. And to the point that we get those scenes where it's like the kid's upset because he got into a fight, and he was like, he's upset because he got beat up, because he's like, he could have sworn he was going to have what Willis has in him. And there's something like really tragic about that when he comes to that realization. His performance, even as a kid, is like really good, and really brings all this through. And then you've got the stuff where 1 minute they're like really close, and the next minute you've got the gun scene. And of course the gun scene doesn't necessarily mean that they're not close, but just that the kid is this convinced. And that's a really powerful scene also. It is kind of... There is something where it kind of goes back and forth in like one moment, because it's... obviously later on in his career, Shyamalan would really go into self-awareness. I think mainly like post-happening in Last Airbender and stuff like that really got him there with like The Visit and Split to an extent. But I almost kind of wonder if it was there a little bit in the moment when... he's talking about, we're friends, you don't shoot your friends, and then it cuts to Robin Wright saying, yeah, we don't shoot our friends. And there's just something so, like, I don't know if it's, like, absurd, that placement there in this scene that's, like, really dramatic up to this point, and then they just throw in that one line that feels like it's supposed to be comedic, but I'm honestly not quite sure, because the scene is so intense around that one line, and it doesn't go beyond that. But I don't know, apart from that, the scene really does work, and it's this really great moment, particularly for the two of them, to show where they stand in this situation together. Now, I was talking about, at the beginning, Shyamalan's sort of unique way in which he, just sort of the look of his movies had this way about them post... starting at The Sixth Sense and going forward. And in this, there's, like, so many... Like, in stuff like Signs, which was, like, I think 3 years down the road from this, it does sort of feel like maybe he was getting a bit carried away and how flashy he got with his direction and the way the camera moves and all that. But here there's a lot of great stuff. Like I said, just sort of that look in general is really recognizable, but also the stuff, like, when... Elijah gets the first comic book, and the way the camera like spins around over top, like overhead, is a really cool shot. And then there is sort of like showing the way in which Elijah's life changed forever, being introduced to this one thing. And then there's like just the really precise way some of these shots are set up, like when they're talking at the stadium and we're looking through like those bars, and instead of like them sort of being in between bars together, there's like that one space in between two bars that they both exactly fit into. I always thought that was like a really... just the precision of that shot just really kind of stood out to me. But then there's also there's little details, and well, not even just little, like you can see them plain as day, but stuff like what the inside of Elijah's car looks like and how everything is soft to protect him. And just little things like that that seem like they're logical, but they still kind of seem like weirdly off in a way that's kind of unsettling. It kind of makes his character a bit more unsettling before we know the truth about him. So I do like there's so many things from a technical level and the emotional level and even the performances. Like this is I think widely considered one of Bruce Willis's better performances too. That on top of The Sixth Sense, it's like. I mean, we'll talk about that when Glass comes around, but it's like, for the most part, it's interesting how these performances Shyamalan was able to get out of him, these two, and back-to-back, no less, kind of really showed what he could do as an actor, which was really great. And then, another thing I wanted to mention about the look was, I always like the detail of, like, I was talking about how everything sort of has that sort of dark blue look to it. But then when he starts having the flashes and touching people and seeing which ones are, like, have evil in them or have done bad things, and in those flashes, like, the guilty characters are always wearing, like, something really bright that, like, really stands out. Even Elijah, when the twist is revealed at the end. So, yeah, all that stuff works. And as far as... obviously, this was the second step in the almost everything Shyamalan does is going to have a twist in it thing coming. So with this is one of those cases where it's really hard to, like, I remember being surprised by the outcome when I first saw it, but it's one of those movies where when you watch it back again, it's like and this is what he was like such an expert at, because it's the same thing for The Sixth Sense. It's like you go and you watch it back and you're like, it just seems so right in your face, and it's like, how do you not see it? And it's like, that's what makes him so skilled, and how he's able to do those twists, and why it became something he was like really known for. Unfortunately, something he kind of got stuck with. Like, it got to a point later where it was almost like it seemed like he felt like he had to do that all the time. But with like The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, it just came in such a really well constructed way, to where it's like it just like it spells everything out for you, like right in front of you, and just somehow it's not till those reveals that it just all falls into place in a really nice way. And like even when you get to him sitting on the bench with his mom when he gets the comic book, and when she says, they say this one has a surprise ending. It's like right there they just tell you, and then that dissolves into the art, the drawing that's in his store that he's showing the guy that's gonna take it to his 4-year-old for some reason. And so even I'm not like near as, I'm not even like that big of a comic book person, but even I'm wondering like, why would that guy want to do that for a 4-year-old exactly? But here though, it's when Elijah is explaining about the original art, and how it sort of shows the difference between like the classic depiction of good and evil. And then he's saying like you see the square jaw of a hero, and you see like the disproportionate head of the villain. And it's like obviously you see the square jaw in Willis, and I guess the disproportionate head in the villain would be his hair. That's the way I've always associated it anyway. And it's like, and the fact that he's saying like what makes this piece special is like the realistic depiction of it. And it's like, Elijah's just describing the movie at this point. So, like I said, it's just literally telling you everything, but it's like so well constructed and so well written and just kind of woven like that. It probably also helped that it was one of those cases where even though it was right after The Sixth Sense, it wasn't like everybody was expecting his next movie to also have a big twist, so maybe a lot of people probably weren't even thinking about the idea of that. But then again, it's also one of those movies where like, even though it's got all this great stuff in it, it does feel like it does have to lead to something, where like there is something, but that's also shows how well made it is. Also, is you're always like anticipating like, where exactly is this going, even though it does keep you more or less constantly intrigued. And then by the time David basically does become superhero complete with the whole his raincoat making him practically look like a cape, but also shielding him from the water that's his weakness and all that. It's this really great, well thought out thing, and like this, I know it's kind of played up to death now. Everybody's saying like this is one of the best superhero movies ever. And it's like people don't think to associate this when they talk about superhero movies and stuff like that. I think that's been said so many times now. Pretty much everybody makes that association now. But it really does like earn it in this really interesting and unique way. And I do think it did. I mean, I know everybody was like salivating for a sequel for the longest time. Despite the ending, which does seem like really cut off at the last minute with the text and all that. I think I had heard somewhere there was like more to the ending, but I can't remember if it was a studio thing or what it was, but the fact that he had to cut it off like at the last minute and just say, this is what happened in text real quick, like wasn't his first decision, if I understand correctly. But even so, I think I was going somewhere with that, but I don't remember where now. But so yeah, but when it does get to that point, it's like it all comes together. Oh yeah, what I was going to say was, I don't know that... I thought it kind of worked fine as a standalone. Like, I wasn't one of those people that was like, really begging for another one, much as I do like it. I really thought just kind of by itself, it kind of held its own, but nevertheless, we do have a trilogy now, so I guess we can branch off into those other two. So as I stated in the beginning, obviously it was relatively recently I talked about Split at length when we first saw it, when it first came out 2 years ago. But I figure I'll just touch on it just briefly here real quick, just to make sure I still feel the same way, or if anything got better or anything got worse. For starters, it is like the perfect, just going right into it. It's another one of those things that seems like it should have been so obvious, especially when you look at the cover and you see like the actual broken glass. It's like it's just right in your face. But when at the very end of Unbreakable, when they're talking about like heroes and villains and all that, and it's Elijah's mom that's talking about the different villains, and how there's one villain that's like, you know, the mastermind, and there's the other that's the soldier villain, the one that like fights the hero with his hands. And it's like, of course, we have to meet that person before we go into Glass. And it's really interesting to watch these. I know a big criticism of this movie I heard quite a bit, particularly from the people that I know personally, was that they thought the Betty Buckley scenes were like way too into exposition. Like there was way too much explaining, and like a lot of it just sort of felt like getting the scientific explanation for Kevin as opposed to kind of getting to see it for ourselves, and we were bombarded with that. For the most part, it doesn't bother me too much. It probably could be cut down a little bit, but it's certainly less, you know, relentless than like a Nolan movie or something. But still, but the thing that I like, especially when it's the scene when she's walking around with her colleague and she's talking about Kevin's situation, is that the way she describes Kevin to him and like the way he's able to do all this and what he has feels so much like Elijah telling David about himself and what he feels like his potential is with what he has. So I really like kind of like that mirror to it also, and to kind of show that in a way both sides are coming from the same place a little bit, or at least the way that they have a potential that needs to be realized for better or worse. Now, as far as the side characters, which I think is another thing that kind of got criticized, basically the only thing in this movie that consistently never gets criticized is McAvoy, which is obviously for good reason. But before we gush about him again, there is the side characters, starting with Anya Taylor-Joy, obviously. The really interesting thing here where, once again, Shyamalan has that thing I was talking about where it's like, he'll start to set something up, and you have no idea where it's coming from, or why we're seeing it, or how it's going to fit into what's happening later. It's when we just sort of randomly start getting flashbacks of her character as a child, going hunting with her dad and uncle, which really actually doesn't take long to get to the point, and to help us kind of figure out where it might be coming from. To see not only is she... I mean, obviously, once you know everything is when it really kind of starts to fall into place, obviously, like a good twist does. I don't know if twist is the right word there, but you get what I mean. But this whole thing where it kind of starts up, like, the idea is that it's showing us that she was once a victim in her life, and now this is going to be her way to break out of that and not be a victim anymore. But then once we know everything, there's the double side here where it's like, both of them, her and McAvoy, are like these emotionally wounded people that were emotionally wounded by their own family after they lost their father. So it's like they're all kind of coming from, once again, coming from the same place, albeit from very different directions. And the great thing is what's going to happen when they converge. And so, as far as the other side characters, which would be Haley Richardson and the other girl whose name I've forgotten, who are the other hostages with her, there is, I kind of hate to word it this way, but I don't really know any other way to put it. This is another one of those things where, like, you kind of want to criticize it, but then it makes more sense when you see where it's going. Because it is nice to have as many characters as possible, and like I was talking about with Unbreakable, where it's, like, the more human these characters feel, the more it'll be, you know, impactful when stuff happens to them, or they're in peril, or whatever. The more real they feel, the more real the world feels. Just kind of together. So, when we meet those other two girls, there is this whole... They do feel like less like, you know, real characters and more like products of a screenplay with the way they talk and the way they function and all that, and how they're basically meant to show off a certain type of girl and all that, and then the way they sort of mindlessly go into this, like, thing, like, at the start, it's kind of like the Richardson character's trying to say, like, almost like she knows she's in a movie, and she's like, I'm not going to be a victim, we can just hit him. But Anya Taylor-Joy knows she's in a movie, and she's saying, like, we really can't do that because he'll absolutely fuck us up. Which could potentially be, you know, the real world also, but then it's like, the more it goes on, the more there is, you know, kind of a genuine fear for them, especially the more their desperation kicks in, the more they try to get out and all that. But when I think about how insignificant I feel like their characters are, once again, it does help a lot to know the whole picture, and it's like, to finally figure out that those characters are pretty much here to just be, you know, sacrifices for the beast, to just be his food when he gets here. And the fact that the movie lets them live out that fate does make it seem like they were never going in a direction anyway. So it's, I mean, once again, it does still feel like very tragic when you think about it. It's like these are these young girls, and you know their insides end up on the outside, and even being PG-13, this movie will show that. But still, there is this sort of like, it does feel like there's a bit of a clunkiness when we're just focused on them. That's not so much there when we get, you know, McAvoy into the story and all that. But I mean, this performance from McAvoy would have raised, like if Split were a bad movie altogether, which it's very, very far away from being, like it is like an actual good movie on the foundation. But even if it was a bad movie, McAvoy's performance would have saved it. And I think there's even some people that I've met that do think Split is a bad movie, but will say the same thing, that McAvoy saved it anyway. Which really does go a long way, because there's also, well, actually, there was one more thing I want to touch on before we go into the, I keep forgetting shit. This is why I should write shit down, but, about the characters feeling human also, and how sometimes it might seem like maybe Shyamalan's overdoing it just a little bit. But I mean, it is nice to, you know, bring humor into it also, especially since he's getting a lot more self-aware, like from The Visit forward. So, The Visit, which was, like, right before this. So, as far as the characters feeling like, kind of like establishing this whole real world, and another way he seemed to want to try to grasp that was by having characters talk about stuff that wasn't just the plot. So we get scenes like, the people that Betty Buckley associates with, like her neighbor that watches Wheel of Fortune, or the Shyamalan cameo about the dude that's obsessed with Hooters. And it's like, I think why that stuff's in there, to kind of create that sort of like it's creating a real world where characters don't just discuss plots and all that. But it does feel like a bit much when these characters feel, the fact that you can tell that's what he seems to be doing, and it doesn't feel natural, is kind of where those characters falter. But once again, this is just side stuff, and really it's all about whenever McAvoy's on screen is when this movie is at its absolute peak. A good thing he's the main character and on screen for an abundance of it. So, as I was saying, the first time I saw it, it's still, every now and then occasionally, it still kind of is, now that I've seen the movie even a few times. The way that, he, obviously, his personalities come out, and the great thing about McAvoy's performance is, you can tell, sometimes the costumes help, obviously, but even if the costumes weren't there, like, just the way he stands or his expressions or whatever, you could tell which one was which, just by those characteristics. But there is that whole thing that's set up very early, and it's kind of something I wish they hadn't delved into so early, because then it kind of fucks with you for the whole movie, which in itself could be, you know, make it a bit more fun for some people. The idea that Dennis can impersonate other personalities, or it's like, I get it. That's a really great concept, and that really does work in a way that sort of disorients you and makes you think, like, which one are we actually talking to? But I think that it would have been nice to establish the personalities a bit more, especially Barry, because it's like, we spend the whole movie wondering if we've ever even met Barry at this point, and we wonder how long Dennis has been impersonating him. And it's like, it does kind of, like, do a disservice to those other personalities. And to McAvoy's performance showing the different ones, because once that's established that early, pretty much every time we meet another personality, it's in the back of our heads it could just be Dennis impersonating one, or any of the others impersonating another. And it becomes like more about that and less about the way the characters can bounce around, the personalities can bounce around. It is a very cool idea, though. But then there's also those cases like the whole thing about Dennis being OCD, and then there's the moment where Patricia's making the sandwich, and she has to throw the sandwich away because it's crooked when she cuts it down the middle, which is such a Dennis thing to do. So there is like that kind of constant confusion, but and it could be a bit clearer, but overall still, McAvoy is just so magnetic, it's really hard to take away from any of that. It's like I said, that's an acting exercise all its own, to be another personality, pretending to be another personality that's inside another personality. Yes, and the fact that he was able to bring that through so effectively is, like, just absolutely insane. And that's before we even go into Glass, when he did, like, even more. And it's like one of the impressive scene of the movie is when we finally get to see him do, like, all the personalities sort of at once, like, just going from one to the other as he's talking to her with, like, no cuts in between, and just watching him do it without a break is, like, insane. Like, I spent the whole movie the first time I saw it hoping we'd get a scene like that, and I was so glad. It was kind of like, almost like taking us into the finale before the Beast came out, what seemed to be for good at the time, or at least for the climax. So, and then there's also cases where it's like, maybe there's some symbolic stuff in there, or maybe not stuff that's, I guess, symbolic, but maybe not that subtle about it, like the fact that, obviously, Dennis, like, hates things being dirty, and even freaks out over the fact that there's a crumb on her shirt. And it's like, it kind of shows the distance of personalities, that the original person that they're all inside is literally named Crumb. So it's like, you can kind of see where Dennis is, like, sort of the total opposite of him, just in that regard alone. And then we get to stuff like Hedwig, and I think I may have said this when I first talked about it, but every time I watch it too, it still comes out, and that's the amazing thing that McAvoy does with Hedwig here is the fact that Hedwig could have absolutely, easily been the death of this entire movie if he was executed poorly, or if it just went totally wrong. I'd say that's a lot to Shyamalan's direction, too, but, I mean, to really do this character where you're playing, like, this really scary dude, and then you're playing, like, you know, the fashion guy with Barry, and then you've got Patricia, like, a woman, and then it's like, by the time we get down to a 9-year-old, this could have gone way too into the whole, you know, practically parody sort of way. But I think the fact that he found, like, just that middle ground, like, that stuff I was talking about where when it was right off the visit when he seemed to really find a self-aware way about him and to really embrace that stuff that people, like when people watch The Happening and they watch it, it's like a pure comedy, and, like, he was able to embrace that. But as he embraced it, he was able to find a middle ground, because there's plenty of freaky stuff in The Visit, too, despite almost practically being a comedy. But here, him and McAvoy together, with Hedwig, just really find this really perfect sweet spot, where if it was anything very little outside of that line, this character would have collapsed, and audiences would never have accepted it. But like I said, and the fact that it's like, he may almost be at his most intriguing when he's Hedwig, just kind of says everything about that. And the fact that he's able to kind of combine, like, the funny, what the hell is going on, and a little bit creepy at the same time when he's doing it. Like the way he walks across the floor and that crouched walk, kind of is all those things at the same time. Then there is the dance scene, of course. And the thing I like about the dance scene is that we're basically watching it from 3 different perspectives, and they're totally different reactions to this. Because we're watching this as an audience, and when we see him dancing like this, to this music, trying to impress her, we laugh. Because there is something funny about this, to the point that it's absolutely absurd. Then we look at it from Hedwig's perspective. While we're laughing, Hedwig thinks he's being cool and badass and all that, which makes it even funnier. And then while Hedwig thinks he's being all cool, and while we think it's funny, Casey is terrified and bewildered. And all of this is happening from all 3 of these different perspectives as this is happening. And that's, I think, why I love that scene so much. Once again, maybe my favorite scene in the movie. So, and on top of that, also, we do have the, another thing I wanted to mention real quick was, apparently I read somewhere, I think McAvoy mentioned it, was the whole dance that he's doing is, I guess a lot of people took it as, symbolism for the Beast coming out of him when he comes towards the camera like that. But apparently it's just Hedwig being a stupid kid, and it was him basically telling this story of, like, a guy getting involved in a dance battle with a zombie, and the zombie bites him, and he becomes a zombie, and that's what he's doing. So I do like that it's something like that ridiculous, but at the same time you could totally buy it as it's symbolism for the Beast about to come alive inside him. So it's either something really foreboding and terrifying, or stupid and hilarious. And they both work. Like, either way you want to look at it totally works, because that's totally the kind of thing Hedwig would come up with. And then, so is that about it? I think I pretty much touched on everything the first time I talked about it too. So yeah, I get where, like, you know, some of the characters feel clunky and there's like way too much exposition a lot of the time, but overall, I still like it quite a bit, and there's still plenty of, you know, suspense in it, and obviously just watching McAvoy just bounce around like that, just will never get old. And obviously even Glass proves it's like, even if the movie falls short, we got it in both cases where it was like, I want to know what this performance looks like in a really good movie and one that maybe isn't as good, and we can see just how much he holds it together, even if, you know, he doesn't necessarily have to be the one that saves it. He's definitely willing. He's definitely, you know, willing to do that. But there is also the case of the twist where it's like, I obviously the whole Unbreakable thing was like unexpected, and I didn't really, I don't know anybody, I didn't hear like anything going into this that this was even a remote possibility. Like, if anybody brought it up, it was something that I didn't read till after the fact. So I was quite surprised, but the thing about that was, it's another thing where it does feel like enough of a surprise, is the fact that you already feel like the surprise has come, because for me, I had just kind of assumed that the twist was the fact that the Beast was real, because I did like the way the Beast had like a mythology about him, where it was like the personalities debating with themselves whether he was real or not, and whether he was actually going to be another personality. And the fact that he can like grow and climb on walls is like this really unexpected thing, and the fact that he can transform himself through his personalities. And once again, we're dealing with a fictional movie, even despite the fact that it's setting itself up to be as real as possible. Fantastical stuff like that, I feel like, is welcome, and the fact that he can do this, and it does make him this sort of like super villain type. Um, so yeah, I still like it quite a bit. Maybe I don't like as passionately as I did when I first saw it, but I still like it quite a bit. So, and obviously McAvoy is a huge way, pretty, well, I guess almost entirely the reason for that. So yeah, that's where I stand with that. Alright, so we finally made our way to Glass. And obviously I was a bit, you know, startled at first, because Unbreakable has quite a fan base and has been growing over time. And then Split got some really positive reviews, made a lot of money, a lot of people really liked it. McAvoy blew everybody away. It was a bit jarring to see that apparently Glass wasn't getting received very well on a kind of critical scale, and it kind of, the percentage just kind of kept going down and down. But honestly, I was hyped enough to where it was like, the first thing that kind of made me feel okay was, I think it was like maybe a couple of weeks ago or so, where Shyamalan had to come out and say that apparently Glass was not the movie that the advertisements were leading it to believe. And since I don't watch the trailers for TV spots or anything, I wasn't quite sure what they were showing, so I didn't really have expectations. I kind of figured it would be something in the vein of, you know, Unbreakable and Split and stuff like that, but maybe get a little bigger because it's going to be like a grand finale or whatever. So I was open-minded when I went into this, and I really wasn't all that concerned, actually, because I was like, you know, maybe people just didn't get what they expected, and that's the problem, but we'll see what happens. So we learned that it's like 3 weeks later. It's 3 weeks after Split, so he's still running around, still kidnapping girls, still holding them up for food for the Beast and all that. But we're also introduced to David Dunn again, who we obviously saw in the diner, but now we learn that he's not working at the stadium now. He's got his own security company with his name on it and everything that he runs with his son, who's still played by Spencer Tree Clark, which is really nice. So it's interesting how many people they got back. I want to say the comic book guy was the same guy also, the guy that tries to wheel Elijah out in Unbreakable and keeps, yeah. I'm pretty sure that was the same dude also. So, when we're looking at this, we do realize that we're kind of in a different place, but at the same time, he's still, you know, doing his thing. He's still, you know, wearing the raincoat and going out. His identity still hasn't quite been revealed. It's really eerily similar to what he was doing in Death Wish. But I don't know if that was Death Wish's intention or not back then. But here, obviously, there's... the atmosphere is kind of still here. I do think one thing that's missing is... it would have been really nice to get James Newton Howard back for the score, because Unbreakable's score is so, like, you know, recognizable and really just in tone with that movie. But it is the same guy that did the score for Split, so there's like that sort of feel going on. But and yeah, obviously the big question is it more of a sequel to Split or more of a sequel to Unbreakable? At the start, Split, because we get this whole opening with Patricia's actually the first one we see, and then the next scene being with Hedwig. And I really kind of love this scene, actually, where Hedwig is continuing to walk that line where it's like, this movie could be so creepy or so ridiculous, and we're kind of going in both directions, and I'm walking that tightrope, but I'm not falling, that McAvoy does. The way he's just sort of going around on these skates as Hedwig, and he's just kind of circling them. And like I said, it's half sort of, naive kid, half, psychopath. And you're kind of getting both vibes from it also. But the thing here is, as far as going into Dunn finding him and all that, I'm not sure what exactly the, advertisements reveal, but obviously they all three end up in the institution or whatever it is. I assume we know that. That's what the damn poster is. But the thing here is this whole opening where it's like, are we getting our sort of action portion out of the way? And it's going to be much more of a psychological thing. Which, I don't know about anybody else, but was kind of what I was expecting. So I really wasn't put off at all when a lot of this movie is just in the institution and it's Sarah Paulson kind of, running tests on them and showing different ways to sort of interact with their powers of sorts. Whether it be the lights that can change McAvoy's personality or the water that'll, keep David confined. All of this while Elijah's off in his own cell, practically catatonic, it seems. But he does get... I was a little concerned about that at first, but Elijah does get a lot more interesting. Like, there is a reason the movie's named after him, not just because that was kind of the direction they were going to go anyway. Because obviously Unbreakable describes David, Split describes Kevin, so obviously, we were going to get to Glass eventually. But the thing here is that I did feel for a while, like... I mean, I try not to think about this, especially when it's going in with negativity, but it's like... Every now and then I was watching it kind of thinking, like, what do people hate about this? Because it's really... I was kind of intrigued pretty quickly and for a very long time. And then these scenes where, Sarah Paulson's running these tests on him and saying stuff like... The interesting thing is, I'm reminded of those scenes in the Conjuring movies when it seems like something supernatural is happening, and then the Warrens figure out this logical reason of why it seemed like something supernatural was going on, but it was actually just... like pipes or wood on the floor or something. And Sarah Paulson's breaking down all these things that could make what they see as their powers seem logical, like in the real world. And it's like, maybe it's just a subconscious thing that you're not thinking about or whatever. And it's like, maybe because you saw something that made you think of this and you took it as having a premonition or whatever. And I actually really like sort of exploring that. I know, like, there was the whole build-up of them discovering this, and it almost seems like it's sort of backtracking, trying to put some realism into it to the point that it almost seems non-existent. But I liked being able to kind of explore both territories of, like, it really could be this, and it's obviously been shown to be this in the movies, but, like, what if it is, just this? Like, she even tries to come up with an explanation for how Kevin, like, grows when he's the Beast. And in the moment, you're just like, well, if it really wants to ground itself that much in the real world, maybe there is a logical explanation. But there is, though, still those moments when it's a lot more fun to just sort of watch them when they get to do what they do. And sometimes I don't know how well this is executed, where I think some of the problems come in for a lot of the movie, where I wasn't, like, really disliking it or anything, but every now and then I was like, why would he make this choice, or why would he do that? Why would he deny us this as an audience? Like I said, one of my favorite scenes in Split would be when he's, going through all the personalities at once and just switching back and forth as he's talking to her with, like, no breaks in between. So there's this thing going on where when they flash him with the lights, his personality changes. And there's this scene that exists pretty much just to show that off. Like, it's kind of, like, in the moment it's like, why is this happening? Where it's just an orderly in the room with him, and it's not like he feels threatened or anything. He's just kind of doing it to do it and just kind of watching it in awe, I guess is why he's doing it. But it's like, it's mainly just to let McAvoy show off. But the thing is the way this scene is shot is it's not letting McAvoy show off, because we can hear him, but the camera's lingering on the orderly's expression as he's flipping the lights on and off. And it's like, shouldn't we really get to watch McAvoy go from these different characters? It cuts back to him, you know, occasionally, but like, keep the damn camera on him when he's doing that shit. It's like, it makes it much more worthwhile and much more interesting, and really makes the character, you know, this really big thing on screen to watch him bounce all over the place with all these new personalities we didn't know in Split. We're getting to meet like new personalities. For those people that were pissed off, we only met like 8 or 9 in Split. They still don't get to all 24, but it's close. It's like 19 or 20 of them or something. Some of them not as intriguing as the others. Some of them funny for like the little sort of period that they're there. But yeah, like really, you know, show him if you're gonna do that. And that's kind of where it falls short, is just sort of the execution a little bit. Like obviously action isn't exactly a territory Shyamalan's really experienced in, but you can kind of tell when you're watching this too. Especially when it gets to the end. Especially these shots where it's like the camera's just in front of them, and it's like I guess the point of view of who they're fighting. And that's more so like what the end is. At the beginning, he's like on his back. I know it's just kind of weirdly shot for an action scene, and for a movie that's built up that this is the kind of thing we're looking at. It's some weird choices, but like I said, there's not near as much action as that might make it sound like. It's really just kind of a bookend deal more than anything else, the action is. But, so yeah, then we've got some stuff where you can tell it's a bit... you can kind of see some holes here in regards to the making, where it's like, I don't know if it was always the plan that Robin Wright wasn't going to be in this, like if he intentionally wrote her out, or if it was more of a case of they just couldn't get Robin Wright, like maybe she was busy with House of Cards or something. But the fact that we actually have this scene where David has a flashback of trying to get her attention in the kitchen when their marriage was falling apart again, apparently. And it's like her facing away, like working on the stove, and he's just kind of talking to her, and she like never turns around, she never speaks or anything, and it's like, it's just this stand-in. And it's like, it just seems so blatantly obvious. That definitely screams more, we couldn't get Robin Wright, as opposed to she was intentionally written out. So there's stuff like that. But then as far as flashbacks go, there is another thing here where I remember reading about it, but then I forgot about it until they started showing up. But he does skillfully use deleted scenes from Unbreakable as flashbacks. Which actually, like, that might sound like that's sort of weird, but you can tell it seemed like his intention to sort of gradually write them in, and they kind of flow really nicely in there, and it kind of shows... And it was kind of jarring at first, because when we see, like, Willis in the doorway of his son's bedroom, it's like, I was like, wow, they really did a great job de-aging him. But then when I saw Spencer Tree Clark, I remember, like, oh yeah, they're using the deleted scenes, that's really cool. So that was actually really well done. That's something else that could have looked like shoddy as hell, but he really did make it flow nicely. And so there are other things here where, like obviously it has, you know, problems here and there, and like the lights thing kind of goes on for way too long, especially when we're not actually watching McAvoy. And there's some stuff that feels maybe a bit too clunky, whether it be the way characters fit in or the exposition. I don't remember how many times in this damn movie we're reminded that Unbreakable was 19 years ago. It's a lot. Like, they really seem to think that we've forgotten this was a sequel to Unbreakable. So they remind us over and over and over and over again. But I mean, apart from stuff like that, they really had something here. Like there was going in an intriguing direction by staying within the institution. The way the characters interacted with the other, like seeing David interact with Kevin and Kevin interact with, you know, Elijah, and all this stuff come together like that. It's something like you could tell. Like, this is something people waited a long time for in certain scenes, and it was really gelling really nicely. And every now and then there's something that's like, you know, will catch you by surprise, or, you know, it'll be a nice standout scene. The performances will be really nice. But eventually, and this is the problem too, is when it started to get towards the climax, where it's like when you anticipate one thing in a Shyamalan movie, it's obviously going to be the ending. So the thing here is, you're just kind of watching this, and for me anyway, it was like, okay, I can get behind this, and it's like, maybe this didn't work so well, or maybe that didn't work so well, but it's got a nice flow, and I'm still really in it with the characters, and I'm still rooting for me to like this. And it's not like I'm really, really trying to like it. Like, it had me and everything, even if I could see, you know, a flaw here and there. But then as it was getting to the climax, and I'm not even saying that it has to be like this big thing. Like, if anything, it's like the anti-big, you know, comic book movie. Like the big Marvel movie or whatever. Most of the actors in this movie have been there already. But so it wasn't necessarily that I was expecting that, but the way it was so well done, the way they brought it together, and the way they headed towards that climax, and the way it does feel like, you know, a whole suiting up thing. And then we get to, and even as it's going on, the climax is fine. Once again, the main problem is that action is not really Shyamalan's thing, and like the way it's shot is just really off and not very exciting. It's this last 20 minutes or so. What I tried to do here was not have like a complete, total knee-jerk snap judgment of this. Like, usually I come right home from the theater and then I sit right here and then I say exactly how I'm feeling. And it's like, I felt like I couldn't quite do that with this, because it's like, I was certainly feeling things that were so not positive when I walked out of that theater, and even when I was still sitting here, so I kind of just took everything I could and kind of just kept thinking about it and thinking about all the different scenarios of why Shyamalan would write some of the things he did for this last 20 minutes that's just... Because before I really tried to think about it and give it the benefit of the doubt and say, maybe if I think about it a little bit, I'll see some logic here, or I'll see maybe this is why he made this decision, maybe why this is what happens then, maybe why this was so anticlimactic. But my initial reaction would have been to just sit here and say, what in the goddamn fuck could he have possibly been thinking? And I suppose there is something here, like I said, going with the whole, I guess, anti-comic book ending. I don't know. But it's... I really don't know how to take this. And this, like I said, I'm not somebody that was exactly, you know, all over the idea of having an Unbreakable sequel. Like, I welcomed it, but it's not something that I felt like I needed. I'm really wondering how the people that felt like they needed an Unbreakable sequel feel after that ending. I'm really glad I'm not one of them. That's for sure. So I don't know. Like, I've heard a couple of things. Like, I had to, like, you know, get online and say, I've got to know at least a couple of things. Usually I don't like to look at what people say before I say my own thing. But it's like, I've got to know at least a couple of things people are saying. Like, if they're having the same reaction I am. Because another reason I did that is there is one aspect of this ending that is just so dropped from the fucking sky, I really thought I had totally missed something. Like, somehow. Like, something huge. And I was like, did I just sleep through something? Like, where does this come from? But no, I'm pretty sure they just decided to lay it on us that this is going on too, at the very, very, very last second. And that's the thing too, is I was talking about the way we get, when we're in Unbreakable, when we start from where we are, where we got a baby with broken bones and Bruce Willis and a train wreck. And it's like, how do you group those two things together? And by the end, you're like, this fits together like a damn puzzle so perfectly. And it all makes sense, and the clues were all there. This is sort of like, this inclusion of this thing, it's weird going around the spoilers here, but this thing that's not introduced to us, that's a major deal in the last 10 minutes or so, is sort of like those really old, like, whodunit mysteries from the 30s, where you have, like, all the, you know, suspects in a room, and the detective's going around and saying, like, you know, oh, you know, you murdered this person because you did this thing, and then this person did this thing. But then they start talking about other characters that we were never introduced to as an audience, so this was something we were never going to figure out. This is something we were never supposed to figure out for ourselves. It was just so they could say, like, oh, you would have never seen this coming. It's like, well, no shit, if you don't even give us the clues. And maybe there were subtle clues in there. Like, maybe if I go back and watch it again, there'll be, like, it'll be something that's blatantly obvious. Like what was going on in The Sixth Sense or Unbreakable. But in the meantime, it's just like, oh, where in the fuck did this even come from? And because this is a huge deal. And it's like, there's none of that stuff to where it's like you can go back and see, oh, all this makes sense now. I mean, they do actually do that in the movie. Like, they go back and show you the scenes from before where it's like, hey, when this was happening, I bet you didn't realize that's what it meant. But it still feels so empty, and the payoff does not feel... It does not feel like a payoff. It feels like we've been cheated, and it's like, this is how we cheated you. It almost felt like, not to insult Glass, but it almost felt like the ending of a Now You See Me movie. Which, like I said, I would never want to insult Glass like that, but still. And like I said, and I think that's might be... And like I said, it's got problems, you know, here and there, but I feel like if this movie's getting a really bad reception, it's definitely because... It's the reverse Bohemian Rhapsody. How I was saying, people come out of Bohemian Rhapsody seeing the Live Aid scene as the last scene, and they remember Bohemian Rhapsody being much better than, you know, the sum of all of its parts. I feel like Glass has a lot of really good stuff in it. And like I said, I was with it for pretty much the... Because I say the last 10 or 15 minutes, the movie is 2 hours and 10 minutes. That's a lot of movie that I was on board with. And I don't want to just, you know, turn around and completely say Glass is bullshit entirely because of this shit-ass ending. So it's really difficult to, you know, decipher. Because I would like to think... If people go around and they're like really, really shitting on Glass, it's this ending leaving a bad taste in their mouth, and not that they thought the whole movie was that bad, even if the movie is far from perfect even before all this. But there's still plenty of stuff going on here that I was into. And like I said, the way it really started to build towards its climax just really started to come together nicely. Even if a couple of things here and there maybe felt a bit forced. There was still, like, every now and then there'll be, like, a piece of dialogue that feels like a bit of a shortcut. Where it's like a character just kind of knows something just because the movie needs to move on. But, I mean, for the most part, though, it's... Yeah, and obviously there is going to be... I think he does overdo it a bit with the self-awareness. Like, the whole thing of, Unbreakable was, like, you know, the whole comic book theme movie disguised as a thriller. But, like, now that the secret's out, this movie is, like, dying to tell you how much of a comic book movie it is, to the point that... You remember, he kind of did this also. Remember the Bob Balaban character in Lady in the Water, the film critic, that, like, was really self-aware of what was going on, and he was, like, explaining everything as it happened. Jackson's doing a lot of that. And I know he was kind of doing that on Unbreakable, but it feels just so much more blatant in your face, especially since... there are so many things that you can easily figure out. Another problem with Glass is the fact that if this is, this might be, like, an actual potential spoiler if you don't want that, so I'll warn you now that that's here. But even if you're, like, avoiding this, you're going to be so disappointed when you find out what it is I'm talking about. So, I remember when Split came out a couple years ago, and there was a very popular theory floating around about what exactly Kevin's origin was, especially for a scene at the end, shortly before he becomes the Beast, that seems to spell that out entirely without telling us a damn thing. Like, verbally. And so people kind of started to put that together, and after Split came out, everybody was like, you know what, I think that's what it is. And it became such a common theory, it pretty much became canon instantly. It was like, yes, of course, that seems to be exactly what he was hinting at. Well, they don't just straight up say that in Glass right away, like I kind of thought they would. It's like everybody already figured it out, might as well just put it on the table right away. No, that's the first big twist. About 2 hours in. Like, without 10 minutes or 5 minutes even left, they decide to drop that as if it's some big bomb on the audience that they didn't see coming. And they build it up, too. Because, like, we see two characters discover what it is. But all we do is see them in shock. And it cuts away. Like, we don't fucking know. So it's like, I mean, I suppose it's one thing that, you know, as Shyamalan's been getting to, especially with Split, it is going to be twist on top of twist on top of twist on top of twist and all that. But, I mean... You really didn't have to save that. We knew. So, and not only did we know, and not only did you save it as a twist, but by God, will they spell everything out in every single possible word just to make absolutely positively sure the audience gets every single little detail without having to figure out even remotely something for themselves.
Because wasn't that so satisfying when you saw Split and you saw that scene and you were like, you got to piece it together yourself and it was like, holy shit. And that's where the holy shit factor comes from, is as it slowly pieces together. There's not much of a holy shit factor that comes from, hey, guess what? This! Did you see that coming? And it's like, it's the way it has to fall into place is the magic, and usually the magic that Shyamalan is, like, known for. It's his fucking calling card. And Glass is just all about saying, here's the stuff. This is what it is. I'm telling you. I don't want you to figure anything out. I'm just going to tell you, just to make sure we're on the same page. Because I want to make sure you get everything. And it's like, who the fuck is this guy? And since when did he start writing Shyamalan's twists? I don't know. So, but that's what I'm saying, though, is all I'm talking about, getting worked up like this, is like the last 10 or 15 minutes, if that. So, yeah, it is hard to not hold it against the entire movie, but I mean, there's still, you know, the rest of that movie. It's fucking annoying how close this was to being good. It is. So, and even the people who don't like it as a whole, can surely see the potential it had. I think everybody can. And that's going to be what pisses people off even more, which I totally understand. But, like, I'm really trying to focus on that, you know, hour 50. Because it's such a huge chunk of it. But, I mean, if this was the go fuck yourself ending he was going for. And there's one very anticlimactic, you know, thing where, like, I saw somebody's explanation for why it might be like that, and why it was treated so nonchalantly and bullshitty. And I guess it kind of makes sense, but it's not enough. It's not enough to make up for that. I can't even imagine him writing that in the script, and it was like, I feel satisfied as a creator finishing my story like this. I don't know. So, I think that's what this is. So, it does kind of suck that that's where we leave this trilogy, but it was fun while it lasted. And we still have Unbreakable and Split. I'm sure will still, you know, stand by themselves just fine, but, and like I said, maybe if I see Glass again, I don't know, because like I said, with how much I did kind of like, I don't think I'd have a problem watching it again. It's going to have to be a long time, but it's like maybe a year from now or something, but we'll see what it looks like from that point of view. Like I said, the way you watch Shyamalan's movies, it's like to see them when you know everything and where it's going tends to turn it into a totally different movie. So, you know, maybe there's hope there. But in the meantime, just feels like a punch in the fucking balls. But yeah, so next week I don't know what the hell, because The Glass is like the only movie I was excited for a while. But we'll see what else happens. So there'll be like a versus like right after this, and then the SAG predictions, a whole bunch of awards stuff coming, the Oscar nominations on Tuesday, all that stuff. So until all that stuff, that's it.